Hi everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today I'm going to talk about a very simple topic, but one which people have a lot of trouble with, which is you can't change people, and they hate when they feel you trying to change them. And this is a very valid truth, and you probably feel that way too if you really think about it, even if it's likely that you're the one trying to change your spouse by virtue of you being more interested in relationships and psychology because you're listening to this. But you probably don't like people trying to change your core self either, and we will get into the weeds of this as soon as I tell you to subscribe. My most recent subscriber episode was Make Decisions in the Home If You Opt Out, and this is for people that kind of let the other person do everything in the house. And that could be a man or a woman, and it's important to understand why you do this and how it is impacting the relationship. Okay, so, and ironically, one of the very things that you may be trying to change your spouse into doing is to be somebody who makes more decisions, right? Or makes less decisions if you find them to be controlling. So that's a great example of what we're talking about today. So you might say, okay, maybe why would you say that you can't change anyone? Because isn't that what you do every day in therapy? And don't people change from going to therapy? Yes, what I don't do is accost people on the street and try to do therapy at them as they're walking on the sidewalk, right? Somebody has to be invested. They have to want to change. Once somebody wants to change, then nobody's changing them. They're changing themselves with help, right? So when somebody gets in better shape, we don't say that the trainer made them get into better shape. No, they utilize a trainer or an exercise machine or a running group or whatever. They utilize that resource in their own journey of change, which they wanted to do, which was not mandated upon them, which they were not forced into. So a lot of times people will want to change things that they act like these are just behaviors, but they're really core to the person. For example, ADHD. You could want your husband or your wife to make more plans. And if you give enough of a carrot and enough of a stick, maybe you'll coerce them into making some plans. But you know what? They'll hate you. They'll hate you because a big core part of their personality is not being somebody who plans ahead. That's who they are. So if you try to change them, then you don't really love them. Now, if they're doing something on purpose terrible to you, then certainly you can set a boundary. Or what if it's not terrible? What if you just want to be with someone who makes plans? You can say, I'm sorry, this isn't working out because I need to be with somebody who makes plans. You can interrogate why you want that. Why is it important to you? What does it represent to you? You know, frequently you're bad at making plans, honestly, if you look inward. So you have a fantasy of them being good at making plans. This is a lot of women who say that they're struggling with the mental load, so they want their husband to take it over, but they're not very good at doing the stuff either, you know? So the hope is that the man will somehow be this person who's good at the mental load when neither of them were ever good at any mental load, right? And they were irresponsible from when they met. And they were spontaneous, and they relied on their families of origin a lot. But now she wishes that he would become a different person that would make her life easier. But he can't just be a different person. Or when men want their wife to be more sexual. So he's saying, oh, I just want to have sex once a week, right? Or twice a week or whatever. So that's just a behavioral change. No, that's a change of who she is. That's a change. You could have more sex at the level that she's having sex with you twice a week, and you wouldn't like it. Right? Because it would just be her knowing that she had to do it and getting it over with to satisfy some sort of rigid requirement on your end. That's why I have the podcast. You can get laid once more per week, but you're not going to be any happier, something like that. And so what you're saying is you wish that you had a more sexual wife, and she knows that that's what you mean. So that's why she doesn't want to do it. Now, does this mean that people shouldn't ever change? Of course not. But your wife, if she wants a more sexual marriage, if she wants to be close to you, if she cares, about having more sex, she'll try to have more sex. If the man wants to make more plans, he'll try to make more plans. But if he doesn't, you kind of gotta, at a certain point, and it's better sooner than later, you have to accept the person that you're with. Then you can make a decision whether or not to stay with them. Because you could spend all your time and money in couples therapy, and unless you both are motivated to change, it's not going to work. I do a lot of couples therapy, and both people have to be motivated to change. They both have to understand that they are not perfect, that they want to grow in certain areas. If your partner doesn't want to grow, then just dragging them into couples therapy, the therapist is not a magician. Your partner knows that you're not happy with who they are. They're chafing against that. They don't have the desire to change. And that's sad. You would also be sad if, for example, they died or they got really sick or something. We cannot change situations just because we find them unpalatable, right? It's funny because I had a comment I might have even mentioned this on a podcast because it was so interesting to me, where a guy said, after 49 years, my wife just upped and stopped having sex with me. It's 49 years? That's a long fucking time. Did you think that it would just continue forever? After 49 years, many people die, and then she's not having sex with you either. So the idea that people are supposed to be this thing that you want is at the root of all marital dissatisfaction, right? Because if you didn't think that you could, with enough effort, crowbar in some change, that you force somebody to change, then you wouldn't be unhappy. You would just kind of say, can I live with this person as they are? And if the answer was no, you would say, I can't live with you as you are. And either you would get divorced, or the person would then be motivated to say, all right, well, maybe let's see what I can change because I want to stay married. But when you say things like, I'm going to stay married no matter what, but I'm just going to make this person change, well, how does that work? Then you're married to somebody that doesn't exist. You're married to all potential. The person is all potential. You don't love the person that you're with. If you love the person that you were with, then the idea of forcing them to change against their will would be abhorrent, right? I mean, it's something deep to really think about. Can you love somebody if you're hoping that they change all these different parts of their personality? Who do you love? You love the potential of what they could become, but you don't love them, and they pick up on it, and they frequently say it in couples therapy, you just don't love me like how I am. There's always a problem. There's always a thing you want to change. Because when the woman starts having more sex, then he doesn't like that she's not romantic. Then he doesn't like that she's on her phone too much. Then he doesn't like that she hangs out with her friends more than him. It's really, he doesn't like that she's more self-sufficient or more avoidant or less dependent or whatever it is, or less close. You could frame it a good way, you could frame it a bad way. He just doesn't like that she doesn't want to be with him that much as he thinks that she, quote, should. And no matter how they frame it, if he does not come to terms with that he's trying to change her core being, it's not going to work. Because frequently when people do realize after a lot of work that they are in fact unhappy with the person's core being, they kind of feel bad. They're like, well, actually, my partner's not that bad. There's a lot of really good parts in my partner if I would just allow myself to focus on them and stop trying to basically build a bear and make the perfect personality. For example, a partner who doesn't plan very much is frequently spontaneous and fun. A partner who is avoidant is also pretty independent and lets you be really independent. And sometimes, of course, you're not compatible and you're not going to be happy no matter what. But it's a hell of a lot better to separate if you don't hate each other than if you do hate each other. People start to hate each other when they think the person can change, they just won't. But when they realize this is the person, this is the person, it's almost like you're yelling at somebody about their height or their hair color or something that is innate in them. It would be like a man who's always wants his wife to be blonde. So she's always bleaching her hair. And when he sees the tiniest bit of roots, he wants her to bleach it. And it hurts her scalp at a certain point. And it's at some point, if she had any self-esteem, she would say, I'm a brunette, and if you want to be with a brunette, you can. And if not, not. And that couple, he would be so much better off with a blonde because obviously that's what he's obsessed with. Or he could do a lot of therapy and say, man, why am I obsessed with blondes? Well, because my mom was blonde. And then they could go off to the races there or whatever the case may be. And maybe he wouldn't blow up his life that she's not blonde. And this is an analogy for everything. You're not going to be happier because you make your ADHD husband forcibly plan one date night that he doesn't want to plan per month. Or your wife who doesn't want to cuddle, she's going to be sitting there counting 10 seconds out until she can move away from being underneath your arm. Now, this is totally different if the person wants to change. And frequently those actual people, they may be into self-improvement. So for example, the guy with ADHD, he could be like, you know what, I really want to get in better shape and I want to be a good role model for my kids with exercise, or I want to get a better job, or, I want us to have more fun, and whatever the case may be that are his goals for himself or for the relationship, but they aren't making more date night plans. Sometimes they could become so on his own. He could be like, well, she's pretty sad that I don't make date night plans, but she doesn't yell at me about it anymore. Maybe I should try. Because remember, if you yell at somebody about something, if you seem sulky and angry and disappointed, your spouse is a human. Why would somebody want to do something for somebody who seems angry with them all the time? If your wife decides she wants to reclaim her sexuality, if you guys get into couples therapy, let's say, and you work on all the stuff that's your fault that she doesn't like about you, and then she may decide on her own, I see that many times, that when one person works on their side of the street, the other person wants to work on their side of the street, right? So you want to clean up your side of the street because the other person did, and then that becomes the culture of the marriage. But trying to forcibly coerce somebody into changing, it just makes them feel like you don't love them, because you don't. Because if you really deeply love somebody, you don't try to force them to change core parts of themselves. And a lot of things are core parts of yourself. Like going from having sex once a week to 3 times a week isn't a behavior change. That's basically asking somebody to pretend they're a super sexual person from somebody who's not. And asking a guy and yelling and crying if they don't to pretend like he's this romantic guy who remembers flowers all the time. All he feels like is you don't like what he does bring to the table. And he says, all right, go find Mr. Romantic then. And that is real. That is how you would feel. And if somebody did it to your kid, if you did it to your kid, you would feel bad about it. If you said to your kid, why don't you look up a couple smart things so that when I come in through the door, you could say a smart thing to me, because I've really always wanted a clever child. You wouldn't do that, right? Because that obviously means you don't love your kid as they are. So there is a part of unconditional love that people have to admit is real, even in our hyper-focused, hyper-self-focused culture. Yes, you do get married and you are supposed to try to unconditionally love that person. That's true. Even if they aren't exactly who you would pick out of a, selection process for making the ideal spouse, you are still supposed to try to love them for who they are. You could tell them about your thoughts and feelings, but in a good faith way, not in a guilt-tripping way. But the majority of the internal work needs to be on acceptance. Can you accept the person that you're with? Because they know when you don't, and that makes everything worse. That makes them defensive, that makes them sad, and you have a person in front of you, not just something where you could toggle the settings differently. And couples therapy is a really good time. It's a really good setting to think deeply about this and to engage in some of this work, both the acceptance and the self-motivated change. And if it's not self-motivated, as I said, it is not going to go well. All right, thanks for listening, everybody, and I'll talk to y'all soon.